My dad forgot to hang up. I heard him laugh and say, "He'll never amount to anything. He's just a loser living off Renee." I stayed quiet, sold my $1.2 million house and disappeared. They came back from vacation, joking until the key didn't work. There was just a handwritten note waiting for them. I 32M never thought I'd be the kind of person to vanish without a trace. But when you hear your own father call you a loser while laughing about it to his friends, something inside you just breaks. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I was on the phone with Dad discussing some minor thing about the house. My house, the one I'd bought with my own money 3 years ago. We wrapped up the conversation, or so I thought. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and tell me first, where did you hear this from? Write it in the comments. I was about to hang up when I heard voices in the background. He hadn't disconnected. The line was still open. I should have ended the call right there, but curiosity kept my finger frozen over the screen. His voice came through clear as day, talking to someone else now. He was chuckling, that deep rumbling laugh I'd known my whole life. Someone asked him about me, about how I was doing. What came next made my blood run cold. He said I'd never amount to anything. Said I was just a loser living off their name, riding on the family reputation they'd built. His friend laughed too, made some joke about how they tried their best but some kids just don't have it in them. Dad agreed enthusiastically. He said they were heading on vacation next week, and at least they wouldn't have to worry about me bothering them for a while. I stood there in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, listening to my father dismantle everything I thought I knew about our relationship. 20 minutes of conversation. 20 minutes of him telling his friends how disappointed he was. How Mom shared his feelings but they kept up appearances for family harmony. How my sister was the successful one. The one who made them proud while I was just dead weight clinging to the family legacy. The thing is, I'd built my own success. I started a software consulting firm right out of college, worked 70-hour weeks for 5 years straight. My company had 12 employees now and pulled in solid 7 figures annually. I bought my house with cash from my first major contract. Never asked them for a penny after I turned 23, but in their minds I was nothing. A failure. A disappointment they had to tolerate. I finally hung up, sat down at my kitchen table, stared at the marble countertop I'd installed myself last summer, and I made a decision. They were leaving for vacation. In a week, Mom and Dad were taking their annual month-long trip to Europe, the one they'd been planning for months. They'd mentioned it several times, excited about their villa rental in Tuscany, the wine tour, the beaches in Greece. I had 7 days. The next morning I called my real estate agent. She was confused when I told her I wanted to sell immediately, that price wasn't the primary concern and that I needed to close within 6 days. She asked if everything was all right. I told her. Everything was perfect. I just had an opportunity. One needed to move on quickly. By noon, I had 3 investors interested. By evening, I had 2 serious offers. One was for asking price with a 4-day close. The other was $50,000 under asking but could close in 3 days. I took the second one. Then I called my business partner. We'd been running the company together for 3 years now. I told him I was ready to take the buyout we discussed 6 months ago. He was shocked but excited. We'd structured the company so either partner could exit with a clean break if needed. He'd been wanting majority control anyway. We spent 2 days with lawyers. By Thursday afternoon, I'd signed over my shares for $900,000. Combined with the house sale, I was looking at just over $2 million in liquid assets. I spent Friday moving everything that mattered into a storage unit across the state. Photos, my grandfather's watch, books I collected over the years, my gaming setup, everything else could stay. The furniture, the appliances, the art on the walls, all of it had come with the house. The new owners were happy to keep it furnished. Saturday, I opened new bank accounts in a different state, transferred everything, closed my old accounts. Sunday, I went to the house where I grew up. Mom and Dad were already gone. Left that morning for their vacation, but I still had my key. I'd kept it all these years, even after moving out at 22. They'd insisted I keep it, said I was always welcome home. I let myself in, walked through the rooms where I'd spent my childhood. the living room where Dad taught me to play chess, the kitchen where Mom baked cookies every Sunday, my old bedroom now converted into a guest room. I felt nothing. In the foyer I left an envelope. Inside was a single handwritten note. I kept it simple, heard every word on Tuesday. Congratulations, you finally got rid of the loser. Don't look for me. You won't find me. Live your best life with your successful daughter. P.S. My name is off everything. The house is sold. The business is sold. I never needed your name anyway. I left my key inside the envelope. Monday morning, I drove 8 hours to a city I'd visited once for a conference. Rented a short-term apartment. Started looking at properties. By Wednesday, I put an offer on a small house in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy, just a solid 3-bedroom with a good workspace for the freelance consulting I plan to do. My phone rang constantly that first week. Mom, Dad, my sister, aunts, uncles, cousins. I watched the calls come in and let every single one go to voicemail. Eventually, I listened to a few messages. Mom was crying, asking where I was, what had happened, why I'd done this. Dad sounded angry, demanding I call him back immediately, saying this was childish and irresponsible. My sister was confused, said Mom and Dad came home from their vacation to find their key didn't work for my house. The new owners had already changed the locks and found my note. Apparently, they cut their vacation short. Came home after just 4 days. Found my note waiting in their foyer. Called me immediately and got nothing. They went to my house next. New owners answered the door, very confused about why these people were asking about the previous resident. They'd already moved in, already made it their home. Dad called my business. My former partner told them I'd sold my shares and left. No forwarding information, no timeline for return, just gone. Then they tried to file a missing person report. The police called me. I assured them I was fine, just relocating for personal reasons, and asked them to note in their system that I was not missing and did not wish to be contacted by family. The officers sounded tired but understanding. The voicemails continued for 3 weeks. Mom's went from confused to hurt to angry to devastated. Dad stayed angry. My sister tried to play mediator, saying whatever happened could be fixed if we just talked, but there was nothing to fix. They'd shown me exactly how they felt. The phone call hadn't been a moment of weakness or frustration. It had been honest. They genuinely believed I was worthless. After a month, the call slowed down. After 2 months, they stopped entirely. I bought my new house, set up my home office, started taking on freelance consulting projects. I was good at what I did. Companies paid me obscene amounts for 3-month contracts that I could complete in 6 weeks. I worked when I wanted, traveled when I felt like it, and answered to nobody. 6 months after I left, my sister found me. I don't know how. Maybe she hired someone, maybe she got lucky. Maybe she was just persistent. She showed up at my door on a Saturday morning. I almost didn't answer, but I was curious. She looked thinner than I remembered, tired. She asked if she could come in. I told her we could talk on the porch. She sat down on my steps and asked why I disappeared. I reminded her about the phone call. She said Mom and Dad told her about it, that it was taken out of context, that they'd been having a bad day and venting. I asked her if she really believed that. She went quiet. Then she told me the truth. Mom and Dad had been comparing us for years, always holding her up as the golden child, the successful one, while dismissing everything I did. She'd known it was happening but never said anything because she liked being the favorite. She was ashamed now, seeing what it had driven me to do. I asked her what she wanted from me. She said Mom was depressed, barely leaving the house. Dad had thrown himself into work, staying at the office until midnight every night. They told everyone I'd moved for a job opportunity, but the family knew something was wrong. Everyone was asking questions they couldn't answer. She said they wanted to apologize to make things right, that they realized they'd made a terrible mistake and wanted me to come home. I told her I was home. This was my home now, and I had no intention of going back to play happy family with people who thought I was worthless. She cried, said I was breaking Mom's heart, that she'd aged 10 years and 6 months. I said, Mom should have thought about that before spending years thinking her son was a failure. She said Dad felt terrible that he'd said things he didn't mean. I said Dad felt terrible about getting caught, not about what he actually believed. She sat there for a long time, tears running down her face. Finally, she asked if there was anything they could do, any way to fix this. I told her they could live their lives and I'd live mine, that I hoped they were happy with their successful daughter, because they'd never see their disappointing son again. She left after that. Didn't argue, didn't plead anymore. Just got in her car and drove away. Update 1. It's been a year now since I disappeared. Life settled into something resembling normal, though normal looks nothing like it used to. My freelance consulting took off in ways I hadn't expected. Turns out when you're not tied to one company or one city, you become incredibly valuable to firms that need specialized expertise for short-term projects. I was pulling in more money than I ever did running my company, working half the hours with zero stress about payroll or overhead. I'd made new friends, joined a rock climbing gym, started playing poker on Thursday nights with a group of guys who knew me as someone who worked in tech and kept to himself. They didn't know my history, didn't ask probing questions, didn't care about my family situation. It was refreshing. Then my sister showed up again, different approach this time. She called first, asked if she could visit. I almost said no, but something in her voice made me agree to meet at a coffee shop instead. She came alone, looked better than she had 6 months ago, more put together. She ordered a latte and sat across from me with the kind of determined expression I remembered from when we were kids and she wanted something. She said she wasn't there to plead their case. She'd spent the last 6 months thinking about everything, about how she'd benefited from their favoritism, how she'd watched them dismiss me and never spoke up. She apologized for that, really apologized. Not the half-hearted sorry people give when they're trying to smooth things over. I asked her what changed. She said she'd had dinner with them a few weeks ago and Dad started talking about a colleague's son who just failed out of grad school. The way he spoke about it, the contempt in his voice, she suddenly heard what I must have heard my entire life. She called him out on it. They'd fought. Dad said she was being too sensitive, that he'd never spoken about me that way. She played him a voicemail. She'd been saving it since I disappeared. On it, Dad was venting to her about how I'd overreacted to a private conversation, how I was proving his point by running away like a child. He said, maybe it was better this way. They could stop pretending I was going to make something of myself. She said watching his face as he heard his own words was one of the most satisfying moments of her life. He tried to backtrack, said he was angry and didn't mean it. She told him that was the problem. He'd been saying things like that for so long he didn't even recognize it anymore. I asked her about Mom. She shook her head. Mom was still convinced this was all a misunderstanding, that I'd come home eventually, that families forgive each other. She was deep in denial, rewriting history in her head, where she'd always been supportive and loving. My sister said she wasn't asking me to reconcile. She just wanted me to know that she finally understood and she was sorry she hadn't understood sooner. She said she'd cut back on visiting them, started setting boundaries, stopped accepting their money for things because she realized every dollar came with invisible strings attached. We talked for 2 hours, really talked, maybe for the first time since we were teenagers. She told me about her own struggles with their expectations, how being the golden child meant she could never fail, never show weakness, never be anything less than perfect. How she was in therapy now unpacking all of it. I told her about my new life, the freedom of it, the simplicity, how I'd gone on dates with a woman I met at the climbing gym. Nothing serious yet, but nice. How I was thinking about buying a small cabin in the mountains as a weekend getaway. How I slept better than I had in years. She smiled at that, said I looked happy, really happy, not the stressed out, exhausted version of happy I'd always projected before. Before she left, she asked if she could stay in touch, not on their behalf, just as siblings. Maybe grab coffee every few months, text occasionally, be part of each other's lives in this small way. I thought about it, told her I needed time to think about it. She understood, gave me her new number. She'd changed it apparently after our parents started using her as a messenger service. Said the ball was in my court. No pressure. Update 2. 18 months since I left. Things took an unexpected turn. I've been slowly rebuilding a relationship with my sister. Coffee every 6 weeks or so, texts here and there. She kept her word about not being a messenger. Never brought up our parents unless I asked, which I occasionally did out of morbid curiosity. Then Dad had a heart attack. My sister called me from the hospital. He was stable, going to be fine, but it had been serious. She said Mom was a mess, that the doctors said stress was a major factor. She very carefully told me this was just information. She wasn't asking me to do anything with it. I thanked her and hung up. Spent 3 days thinking about it. Part of me felt nothing. Part of me felt like maybe I should feel something and was disturbed that I didn't. Part of me wondered if I was becoming the cold person they'd always accused me of being. I didn't go to the hospital, didn't call, send a card through my sister that said I hoped he recovered fully. That was it. My sister told me later that Mom cried when she saw the card. Asked if that meant I'd come visit. My sister told her no. It meant exactly what it said and nothing more. 2 weeks after Dad got out of the hospital, I got a letter. Not email, not text, an actual letter in the mail. My sister must have given them my address. I was annoyed about that, but understood why she had. It was from Dad for pages handwritten. I almost threw it away without reading it, but I read it. He apologized, really apologized. Not the non-apology version where someone says they're sorry you feel that way. He said he'd spent his time in the hospital thinking about his life, about what mattered, about what he'd lost. He said he'd been wrong about me, wrong about everything, that his own insecurities and need for control had poisoned how he saw his own son. He said he'd built his career on being right, on being the smartest person in the room, and somewhere along the way, he'd started measuring everyone against impossible standards. That he'd done it to my sister, too, just in different ways. That he'd driven me away and was now losing her, too. He said he didn't expect forgiveness, didn't expect me to call or visit or come back. He just wanted me to know that he was wrong, that I'd been right to leave, and that he was sorry it took a heart attack to make him see what he destroyed. The last line was simple. You became everything I could never be. Strong enough to walk away from people who hurt you. I'm proud of you, even if I have no right to be. I read that letter 5 times. Cried after. The third time, though I'm not entirely sure why. I didn't respond, filed it away in a drawer, and went about my life. 3 months later, my sister called again. Dad had asked if she thought I'd be willing to meet with him. Just once, just coffee, no expectations. She told him she didn't know but would ask me. I said no. She said she'd expected that, told him I declined. She said he took it quietly, just nodded and thanked her for asking. But something about that conversation stuck with me. The fact that he'd asked instead of demanded, that he'd accepted my no without argument, that he was apparently trying in whatever way he knew how. I called my sister a week later, said I'd meet him once in public for 1 hour, and if he tried to manipulate me or guilt me or excuse his behavior, I'd leave and that would be the end of it forever. She set it up. A coffee shop in a city halfway between where he lived and where I'd settled. Neutral ground. I showed up 15 minutes. Late on purpose. Wanted him to sit there wondering if I'd come. He looked old. That was my first thought. He'd aged more than 18 months should account for. Thinner, grayer, something defeated in his posture. He stood when I arrived, didn't try to hug me or shake my hand, just said thank you for coming and sat back down. We sat in silence for a moment. Then he started talking. He didn't make excuses, told me he'd been seeing a therapist since the heart attack. That unpacking years of his own. Father's expectations, and his need to project success was harder than he'd expected. He said he'd replayed that phone call in his head 1,000 times, heard what I must have heard, understood why I'd left. He said Mom was struggling more. She still couldn't quite grasp that this wasn't fixable with an apology and a family dinner. She kept asking when I was coming home for the holidays, talking about me in present tense like I was just away temporarily. I asked him what he wanted from this meeting. He said nothing. He just wanted me to hear that he was sorry, that he was working on himself, and that he'd respect whatever boundaries I set. I told him the boundaries were simple. We weren't family anymore. He'd made that clear with his words, and I'd made it official by leaving. I wasn't interested in rebuilding a father-son relationship, but I was willing to be civil if our paths crossed for my sister's sake. He took that better than I expected. Just nodded. Said that was more than fair. More than he deserved. We sat for another 30 minutes, talked about neutral things, his work, my freelancing, places we traveled recently. It was oddly normal, like talking to an acquaintance you vaguely knew years ago. When the hour was up, I stood to leave. He asked if there was any chance I'd consider meeting again someday. Not soon, but eventually. I told him I'd think about it. He seemed satisfied with that. I haven't seen him since, though. My sister tells me he asks about me sometimes. Not pushing, just checking. I got a birthday card this year. Simple message inside. Hope you're doing well, Dad. I didn't respond, but I didn't throw it away either. It's in the drawer with his letter. Maybe someday I'll know what to do with them. Maybe I won't. For now, they're just artifacts of a life I used to have, filed away with everything else I left behind. If you enjoyed the story, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe for the more story.